Black Friday has just started, and for most brands, they launch in the next week or two, and most people will make a big mistake in KPI setting. Now, specifically, this is in regards to a ROAS target or an MER target. To keep it short and simple, you're likely setting your ROAS target or your MER target too low, where you actually need to set it higher. And the reason for this is that November customers are the worst customers in the entire year. They repeat at really poor rates. And it makes complete sense when you actually think through the consumer psychology of someone purchasing in November versus January. Anyone that's purchasing in Jan or Feb, they're foregoing all of the sales that have just been active in November and December. They likely have really high disposable incomes. It also likely means that they're very likely to repeat purchase because either they have disposable income to do so, or number two, they like the product so much, they're so convinced by the product in what is generally a low sentiment market, that they are therefore more likely to come back and return. Vice versa, November customers are those that really need to get pushed over the edge by a large sales period. Now, obviously that doesn't apply for everyone, but when we're looking at the delta in increase in sales from a business as usual period to a November period, that delta, that incremental lift in customers, they're pretty much all customers that aren't very good. And it starts to show up in your customer cohort analysis. So if you open up Shopify, you can navigate yourself to the customer cohort analysis. And let's quickly look at this first one right here. So if we increase the size here, what you'll see is that the average order value, so the amount spent per customer is what we're filtering by here, in November of 2024 was $114. Now, over time, their average order value has increased. This isn't a function of margin compression due to discounting in November. This is just the fact that they've been able to make some changes tactically across the website that's improved average order value. So you can ignore that for now, but what's important is what does the growth look like after someone has been acquired? After 6 months of acquisition, post-November, their amount spent per customer increased from 114 to 158. That is an increase of $44. We can also look at this as a percentage, which is 38.5%. And so these customers are driving 38.5% more revenue over the first 6 months of being acquired. Now we can then go and compare this to a different period throughout the year. And so let's jump into Feb, we can jump into March. These are typically fairly poor trading months in e-commerce. Average order value is a little bit better here. But if we come out to the 6 month mark, what you'll see is a substantial improvement in lift. So this is a $79 increase. And as a percentage, and the reason why we're doing a percentage calculation here is just because average order values change. So we just need to adjust for that. This is a 63% increase. And so we're looking at nearly a doubling in how much returning customer revenue we are getting from the customer after they've been acquired. Now, why does this actually matter? The reason why it matters is because a lot of people will go hard on acquisition, at least those that know their numbers well, will go very hard on acquisition under the assumption of a particular LTV number. And so for this brand, for example, just running through, and I won't give real numbers, but we'll just assume that GP is $50. And so with this customer, they know that they can go and acquire a customer for $20 and they'll be happy because they end up with $30 in bottom line contribution profit. Now, what a lot of agencies will do if they're a little bit more technical in an understanding of going more aggressive on paid media to acquire more customers, but ultimately make more money, is they can go, okay, this is calculated based on first purchase order, but we know that these people come back. And let's say we've calculated a $200 LTV over 12 months post-acquisition. And so the actual first year GP on a customer is closer to $100. And therefore, a CAC of $20 is really good here. We can actually probably go more aggressive and we can let our CAC go up to 40 or maybe even 50 we'd be happy with. And then we're still going to make more money because our contribution profit will be $60. Now, this is assuming that if we increase CAC, volume will increase accordingly, and therefore you'll do more total nominal dollars in contribution profit. But the point is here, some people go aggressive on acquisition, knowing that they'll get LTV on the back end. The real key here is that LTV is not the same during Black Friday. In fact, it is substantially worse. In this particular case, it's 50% worse. So if you go out happy to acquire customers for $40 to $50, assuming a really high LTV, that LTV won't hold on your November cohort. Let me show you another example because this very easily can just be cherry picked. So this is in one industry. This is in a very different industry. So we're looking at two very different brands here, both doing over 10 mil online. Once again, we come into November, 116. This lifts to 170. We look at another month. These all seem to be pretty average months here, but the key is average order values dropped. And so even though the dollar amount by month 6 is roughly the same, it's actually considerably better growth as it's coming from a lower base. To keep the math easy, let's come to a recent month instead, and let's look at Feb again to keep it fair. So in November, this was 46% lift through to month 6. In Feb, this is 55% lift. Not as extreme of an example. It is important to note that this does become more extreme when you actually adjust into GP on cohorts. And so the downside of looking at just the basic Shopify report here, and the reason why we don't really use this much, is because this is all based on revenue figures. It's not showing us gross profit figures. And so we like to generate our own cohort analysis that shows us GP growth. The reason why this is important is because during Black Friday, $116 here versus $116 here is not the same thing. You generally have significantly worse GP percentage on that revenue because of all the discounting, because of the offer structure. Okay. And so because of that, over here, you might only have, let's say, $60 in GP, but over here, you actually have 70. And so this is actually a substantially better month, but it's not encapsulated within a revenue feeder. That then also applies into the retention revenue growth. And so because November cohorts aren't very good and they're typically only going to purchase from you when you're on discount, what ends up happening is all of this delta here in revenue growth. So this is 70 minus 16, which is $54 in growth. This $54 in growth is not the same as $54 in growth here. Now, this is actually $60 in growth. That's why there's a higher percentage, but let's just put the same numbers here. These won't end up being the same because customers that are acquired in Feb are much less discount orientated. And so this is likely going to be full priced revenue. And so whatever your GP is on this, let's say it's 50% to keep the math easy, you're going to make $27 here in GP. Whereas in this case, this might be heavily discounted revenue. This might be people that only buy when you have specific sales running through EDMs. They might be scouring the internet for discount codes every time they purchase, etc. And you end up seeing this encapsulated within the data. And so instead, GP over here might only be $18. Now, when you're looking at a cohort analysis and you're zooming out, you might go, 46% versus 55, it's not too bad. Let's have the same MER targets. Let's have the same ROAS targets on the front end. But you completely lose the visibility into actual GP growth. And that's where people significantly end up overspending in November based on targets that don't take into consideration how bad these customers are. And so my recommendation is that if you have an MER target that is grounded in a retention assumption, so if you have a ROAS target of 2, because you know that over the first year, you will get 50% lift from those customers, and that overall this will democratize into a 25% MER within the P&L. Note that that logic doesn't apply. It isn't correct during November because you have to take into consideration that these are substantially worse customers. Now, the direct inverse then applies to Jan and Feb. And so one thing that people don't do enough of in Jan and Feb is that they treat KPIing in these months as if it's the same as November, but it's not. These customers are substantially better. Not only are they buying full priced, generally speaking, but they're going to return at higher rates, and their return orders are going to be full priced as well. And so because of that, you can actually get a little more aggressive in Jan and Feb as long as you have the cash flow to support the marketing budget. And so rather than, for example, in November, you might, let's just make up some numbers, have a 5 MER target, aka 20%, if you're flipping that around. And then in December, you have a 5 as well. In Jan, you might actually be able to push this down to a 4.1 or even a 4.0 because you know that there's such strong returning customer revenue that's going to be captured in the following 6-month period in this calendar year that you can afford to be more aggressive because it's going to prop up your returning customer revenue expectations in the forecast in the following 6 months. So a really important concept to be across to understand. If it's a little bit too confusing and you want to understand how to apply it to your specific brand, you want a cohort analysis that goes down to the GP level, obviously reach out to us and we can put together an audit. If you're an agency, If you're a brand that's operating purely in-house, this is something that you should be logically walking your way through, understanding for all clients, and then applying adjusted efficiency targets accordingly.